31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
A serial killer is on the loose in the Daytona area.
Investigators are on the trail of a possible serial killer.
A stunning claim from an accused killer awaiting trial in Pennsylvania.
And authorities believe they could very well have a serial killer in custody.
And they say it may be the work of a serial killer.
An accused serial killer in
Welcome to 5 Minutes of Murder, my little ditty on the interweb where I, Daddy Longlegs, profile one of the world's real-life monsters, that of the serial killer. On this episode, I bring to you a pedophile, a rapist, a cannibal, a serial killer, all wrapped up in one giant ball of evil that may still be, right now, one of, well, he's dead, but one of the world's most prolific serial killers in United States history. Tonight, I bring you Donald Henry Gaskin, better known as PeeWee Gaskin.
Gaskins is going to claim that he murdered some 80 to 90 young people, torturing them, then prolonging their death, torturing them again, and then hiding their bodies.
Gaskin was born March 13th, 1933 in Florence County, South Carolina. He was the last in a long line of illegitimate children, born a runt from day one to his unmarried mother. And he never knew who his real father was. A lot of stepfathers in there, but not his real father. He was small for his age, and immediately he gained the nickname PeeWee.
Gaskin's childhood was punctuated by a series of stepfathers in his life. He never knew his own father, and his mother had a series of relationships. Gaskin's childhood was also characterized by physical abuse, both at home and especially at school.
As he grew older, in his early teens, he began to hang around a bunch of groups of basically delinquents, hoodlums if you will, which all took part in many different nefarious things like robbing people, assaults, gang rape, and even attempted murder at one time. In 1947, at the age of 14, he mistakenly left one of his victims, the neighborhood girl, who refused his sexual advances, dead in a ditch from basically hitting her over and over again in the head with an axe. Upon her recovery, she was able to identify Gaskins, landing him in the Boys Reformatory in Florence County. He spoke of the time in the reformatory school as a horror. He said because of his size, he was regularly raped by his fellow inmates, and he had to trade sexual favors just for safety. Then at the age of 18, he was released immediately. He seemed to be on the right track. He got a job, he was getting married. That was until he attacked a local teenage girl with a hammer merely for insulting him. He was then arrested, sentenced to 6 years in the state penitentiary. Locked up for good. Nope. Once again, due to his size, this prison stint would be hell for him, as he was chosen by one of the prison inmates to become a sex slave for him. He said it got so bad at one time he finally snapped, and he basically had to kill the most feared man in the prison. That's the only way he could do anything. The most feared man was a gentleman by the name of Hazel Brazel. As a result, Gaskin received his final respect that he needed, but he also received 3 more years in prison. Womp, womp, womp. Funny enough, though, he then escaped prison in 1955 by hiding in the back of a garbage truck. Hey man, he is garbage, so why not, right? From there, he fled to Florida, where he took employment with a local traveling carnival. He was soon rearrested, remanded to custody, and paroled in August, of all things, 1961. So strange, he just kept getting arrested over and over again. Upon his release, he would return right back to his life of crime. He didn't even switch up a gear. And subsequently, he was rearrested 2 years later in Georgia for the rape of a 12-year-old girl. He was there and was sentenced to 8 more years of imprisonment, and then again paroled in November 1968. Upon this release, Gaskin moved to the town of Sumlet, South Carolina, and he began working with a roofing company, a local company that he knew the guys for, and he started doing that. Now this 3-time loser, he had not changed a single bit, and if anything, prison, well, it just made him basically a worse character. He would now evolve into a much more sadistic killer as he got older and more fine-tuned. On September 1969, he picked up a hitchhiker, whom he tortured, murdered, and then basically raped before sinking her body in a local area swamp. Gaskins would later tell about the first one, this first murder. All he could think about in his head over and over again is how he could have done anything he wanted to, and there was nothing that she could do about it. Nothing at all. This was amazing to him. Unfortunately, this would be the very first of many hitchhikers that he would pick up and torture and rape and murder, and he would later confess to killing as many as 80 to 90 such victims during this time spent driving around what he called this whole area the coastal highways of the American South.
He allegedly started in 1969 killing young women primarily, later young boys and young women, along the coast.
He used to travel up and down the road and pick up hitchhikers, and he would torture them.
He always talked about dumping their nude bodies into marsh areas and sinking them deep enough so that it'd be unlikely for people to be able to find them.
He confessed to killing these victims in a variety of matters, from stabbing, suffocation, mutilation, and even claimed to have indulged in a little cannibalism from time to time.
He's someone who wants to be with the victim to experience the terror that the victim is experiencing for as long as possible. Gaskins, for example, would often describe going into a hardware store and eyeing up particular tools that he felt he would be able to torture his victims with for longer. We're dealing with a very, very cunning predator who is quite clearly also a sexual sadist and a psychopath.
Then in November 1970, something changed. Gaskins would start to commit the first of what he called his serious murders. No longer would he just kill random people he didn't know, but now he was going to focus on killing people he knew. And he wanted to kill, for personal reasons, of course. The very first victims he focused on was his own niece, Janice Kirby, who was age 15, and her friend, Patricia Ann Alsbrook, age 17. Both whom he beat to death after attempting to sexually assault them. They both just disappeared around November 10th, 1970, just 4 days short of Patricia Ann Alsbrook's 18th birthday. Her body was found stuffed in a septic tank 6 years later. When she was found, they finally buried her soon after. Gaskins' other serious murders were victims of a variety of reasons. They needed to be killed for certain reasons, because, well, they mocked him, or they owed him money, or they stole from him. These were unlike his coastal killings. Gaskins simply executed these victims. It wasn't personal, but basically he would just go up and shoot them in the head with a handgun. Then in 1973, Gaskins committed one more of his gruesome murders when he raped and murdered two of his neighbors, Dorsey Dempsey, who was at the time age 23 and pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and her child, a 2-year-old daughter, Robin Michelle Dempsey.
Right here is where my daddy used to live, and right over here is where he drowned Doreen, just held her under the water until she had drowned it. And then he hit the baby in the back of the head and hatchet after he had raped her. He said that he just could not resist raping the baby. He said he just couldn't resist it.
The killings continued as Gaskins became more and more depraved, targeting more children for rape and murder. He seemed to get off on this. Now, in 1975, a school teacher by the name of Mary Ann Dunham reports the disappearance of one of her students, a 13-year-old girl, Kim Gilkins.
Kim was in a class of 5th graders, most of whom were 10 or 11 years old, but she was 13, as I recall. She was quiet, petite. Her mother had died, I think, the previous spring. I think she was lonely for her mother and sad, you know, so she was looking for somebody to pay attention to her.
Right out in here is where they found Kim Gilligan. She walked out my front door, and I never seen her again. He took her off from the house and killed her.
Nobody suspected Gaskins to be the sadistic serial killer, pedophile, rapist. A criminal, yes, but not in the scope of the monster that he actually was. His killing spree would then continue.
So we sealed the area off and started digging. And it turned up that we found 6 bodies buried there. Yeah, it was a pretty gruesome scene. I guess I was overwhelmed because, you know, I had been in law enforcement for some 12 and a half years prior to this, and I'd never seen anything of that magnitude.
Then on November 14th, 1975, Donald PeeWee Gaskins was finally arrested when a criminal associate of his was picked up by local law enforcement. Now, when he was picked up, basically to get out of some of those charges that he was facing, he then turned and he dropped dime on good old PeeWee. Womp, 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 womp. He confessed to everything that he knew. He didn't know that much, but he knew a lot, and he told the police everything.
We started looking for the Gaskins girl, and of course we did not have PeeWee at the time, but we did have an individual who was running with PeeWee at the time. We did pick Walter Neely up, and after a lot of talking and everything, Walter finally took the investigators out and showed them where he had helped PeeWee bury someone.
On December 4th, 1975, Gaskins would make a deal with the local police to show him the land that he owned, to prospect it all, and to show him the locations of some more of his bodies. Then on May 24th, 1976, Gaskins was tried on charges of 8 different murders, and he was found guilty on May 28th, sentenced then to death, which later, for no apparent reason, was communicated to 10 consecutive life sentences. Then, on September 2nd, 1982, behind the bars of the maximum prison, Gaskins would commit his final murder. While he was incarcerated in a high-security block of the South Carolina Correctional Facility, maximum security at this point, Gaskins killed a death row inmate by the name of Rudolph Tyner. For this, Gaskins was tried for the Tyner murder, and finally they sentenced him to death. Now, while on death row, Gaskins told his life story to just about anybody. He claimed to have killed somewhere between 90 and 100 murders, including that of a person by the name of Margaret Peg Coanto, who was the 13-year-old daughter of a then local politician, basically the Southern Carolina State Senator James Coanto Jr. of Summit. Then, on September 6, 1991, only minutes before he was on his way to be escorted to the electric chair at Border River Correctional Institution, Gaskins tried to commit suicide by slitting his wrists. Now, he did this with a razor blade that he had swallowed a few days earlier. The funny thing was, it didn't work at all. Too many guards, they were all there. He coughed the blade up, he started cutting, it didn't work whatsoever. On that same day at 1 a.m., PeeWee Gaskins was strapped down to the electric chair.
I was a witness to the execution. And I'll have to say that PeeWee, if he was scared, he never exhibited. He didn't show any sign of fear.
As hundreds of people gathered outside of the building to celebrate his soon-to-be death.
On September 6, 1991, crowds gathered as the state of South Carolina prepared to do what had been thwarted back in 1976.
A rowdy crowd of about 400 people in favor of the death penalty came to the Broad River Correctional Institution to cheer PeeWee Gaskins' death.
When asked what his very last words were, he said, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go." Then, at 1:10 a.m., Donald Henry PeeWee Gaskins was finally executed and pronounced dead. Besides the victim bodies that were already recovered by law enforcement, was there any truth to this 80 or 90 young hitchhikers PeeWee claimed to have murdered and raped? I mean, what he referred to as the coastal killings. Did any of them actually exist? There's some doubt as far as around the whole story, but there's one thing for sure we know. Donald Henry PeeWee Gaskins, who is one of this world's real-life monsters, possibly the most prolific serial killer in all U.S. history, but definitely one that I'm sure, very sure, that none of us are going to miss. And with that, we come to an end of another fun-filled installment of 5 Minutes of Murder. You know, I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it a lot, as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you, because I really enjoy this, and I hope you dug it. Once again, I am Daddy Longlegs, and as always, and just always remember, kids, to lock your doors and windows, because you never know when it's going to be your 5 minutes that are up. Peace.